It was past midnight. The streets were quiet, the wind was cold, and the city lights flickered far away like sleepy eyes. Mason sat on his old couch, a warm blanket over his legs and a cup of tea in his hand. He had just turned off the news when he heard it. Knock, knock. A soft, shaky knock on the front door. He froze. No one ever knocked this late. His neighborhood wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't friendly either. People kept to themselves. Mason slowly stood up, set his tea down, and walked to the door. Knock, knock. Again. Weak, almost like a whisper. He peeked through the small glass window on the door and blinked. A figure stood outside in the dark. Small, thin, wrapped in a torn silver blanket. He opened the door halfway, just enough to speak. "Who's there?" Mason asked, his voice low. A soft voice replied, trembling, "I only have $3. Please, let me shower at your home." Human. Mason stared. She was not human. She was an alien girl, young, dirty, and scared. Her skin was pale green, marked with dark smudges and bruises. Her silver hair was matted, tangled like dry grass. Her big violet eyes looked up at him, pleading, and in her hand she held 3 crumpled dollar bills. "What?" Mason said. Not sure if he was dreaming, she nodded slowly. "Please, I don't want food. I don't want shelter. I just need a shower." Mason didn't move. This was insane. An alien girl in his neighborhood at midnight with $3. "I'm not a bad person," she added quickly. Seeing his silence, "You can lock the bathroom door from the outside if you want. I won't touch anything, I promise." Mason's mind raced. This had to be a scam or a trick. Maybe she was a thief or a part of a trap. But then he looked again. Her feet were bare and cracked. Her hands shook from the cold, and her eyes, they weren't lying. "Why come here?" he asked, still unsure. "I saw your light," she said, pointing to the small lamp near his window. "Everyone else shut their lights. You didn't." He looked at the $3 in her hand. It was all she had. He sighed deeply. Maybe he was crazy, but something told him to help. "Fine," Mason said at last. "Just a shower. Nothing else? Got it?" "Yes," she whispered and bowed her head. "Thank you." He opened the door fully, and she stepped inside. The smell hit him first. She smelled like garbage. Oil and rainwater. He tried not to wrinkle his nose. "This way," he said, leading her to the bathroom. She walked slowly, carefully, like someone expecting to be hit at any moment. When they reached the bathroom, he handed her a towel. "You have 10 minutes," he said. "That's all?" "Understood," she replied softly. Before closing the door, she turned to him and said, "My name is Alira." Mason didn't answer. He just nodded and shut the door. He locked it from the outside, just to be safe. Then he leaned against the wall and stared at nothing. "What am I doing?" he thought. "Letting strangers into my house. Aliens." But he couldn't ignore the look in her eyes that wasn't the look of a thief. It was the look of someone who had lost everything. 10 minutes passed, then 15. He started to worry. Suddenly, the door opened slightly. Alira stepped out, wrapped in the towel. Steam rolled behind her, and her green skin now shimmered with a faint glow. She looked very different, still weak, still thin, but no longer dirty. "Thank you," she said again, her voice softer. "I feel like myself again." Mason said nothing. He was still processing everything. She looked down, then reached into her blanket and handed him the $3. "For your kindness," she whispered. He took the money slowly, not knowing what to say. Then she looked at the front door, her shoulders drooping. "I'll leave now," she said. But just as she turned to go, a loud sound came from outside. Click, click. Footsteps, heavy and fast. Alira froze, her face turned pale. "They're here," she whispered. "They found me. Mason's heart skipped a beat. He looked through the window, but saw nothing, just shadows moving fast. "Who?" he asked, but she didn't answer. She just ran to the corner and hid behind a chair. Her whole body shaking, Mason stood frozen in his own house. What had he just let in? And what was now coming after her? The knock at midnight wasn't just a knock. It was the start of something far bigger. And far more dangerous. Mason locked the front door quickly. His hands were shaking, his heart thumping like a drum outside. The night had turned dangerous. He peeked through the curtains, nothing but shadows and cold wind. But the fear in Alira's eyes had been real. Too real to ignore. She was still hiding behind the chair. Curled up tight, her wet hair dripped onto the floor. And the towel around her was clutched like armor. Mason sighed and knelt beside her. "It's okay," he said softly. No one came in. She looked up slowly, her glowing eyes wide and wet. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They're not just chasing me. They own me." Mason blinked. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then looked around the room. "I need to get dressed first," she said quietly. "Can I? Use something?" "Anything." Mason stood and left the room. He came back with one of his old shirts and a pair of jogging pants. "They'll be too big," he said. "But they're clean." Alira bowed her head. "Clean is enough," she replied. He turned around while she dressed behind the couch when she stepped out again. The clothes hung off her like a child wearing a giant's outfit, but she smiled for the first time. It was small, tired, but real. "Thank you," she said again. "You are very kind." Mason folded his arms. "Now talk," he said. "What are you hiding? Who's after you?" Alira sat slowly on the edge of the couch. Her hands folded, then she spoke, her voice shaking but steady. "I was born on Telvari," she said, "a world far from here. We were known for our beauty, our service, our grace. My family was poor. So I was given to a noble house when I was just a child. They taught me how to serve, how to clean, how to entertain guests." Mason frowned. "Like a maid." Alira looked away. "No," she whispered. "Like property." The room fell silent. Mason sat down across from her. Shocked. "You mean?" "A slave." She nodded slowly. "They don't call it that," she said. "But that's what it is. We wear collars. We sleep on cold floors. We are not allowed to speak unless spoken to. One day, I made a mistake, spilled red nectar on the floor. They whipped me, locked me in a dark room for 3 days with no food." Mason felt sick. His stomach twisted. That's horrible," he said. Alira continued, her voice hollow. "I ran away. Got on a garbage freighter that came near the city. I landed here with nothing but $3 I stole from a cargo bin. I just wanted to wash away their touch," she whispered. To feel clean again for one night, Mason looked at her, this alien girl who had been treated like a thing. And yet, even now, all she wanted was a simple shower. No money, no favors, no tricks. Just a little bit of dignity. Suddenly, there was a soft beep. Alira's face turned pale. She grabbed the towel and ran to the window, peeking through the edge. "They're scanning the area," she whispered. "That's their signal." Mason moved to her side. "Who?" he asked again. "A bounty hunter," she said. "They send them to find escaped property. He won't stop until he finds me." Mason ran his hand through his hair. This was way over his head. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who lived alone in a quiet neighborhood. He didn't want trouble, but now? Trouble had entered his home and sat on his couch wearing his clothes. "You can't stay here," he said at last. "They'll come again." Alira looked down. "I know," she said softly. "I'll leave in the morning." "I promise." Mason hesitated. "You can sleep here tonight," he said after a moment. "I'll keep watch." She looked up, surprised. "Why are you helping me?" She asked. He didn't have a good answer. Maybe it was her eyes. Maybe it was her voice. Or maybe he was just tired of pretending not to care. "I don't know," he said. "But I can't let someone suffer in front of me and do nothing." Elira wiped her eyes. She lay down on the couch, curling up under the blanket Mason gave her. Soon her breathing slowed, and she was asleep. Mason sat by the window. Watching the dark street outside, he still didn't understand what was happening. But he knew this, that knock at midnight had changed everything. And tomorrow, things might get even worse. Morning came with soft rain tapping on the windows. Mason hadn't slept. He sat by the window all night, watching, thinking, worrying. On the couch behind him, Elira was still sleeping. Curled tightly in the blanket, she looked peaceful now, but Mason knew that peace would not last. He stood up slowly, stretched his sore back, and walked to the kitchen, while the coffee brewed. He stared out the window again. Everything looked normal: cars passing, people walking, dogs barking in yards. But something in his gut told him danger was closer than it seemed. He stepped outside to check his mailbox. That's when he saw him. A tall man with a long coat stood at the corner of the street. He wasn't moving, just watching. His skin was pale gray, and his eyes were hidden behind dark lenses. But the most terrifying thing about him was the long, jagged scar that ran from his temple down to his neck. The man turned his head slowly, locking eyes with Mason, even from far away. Mason felt a chill crawl down his spine. The man pulled out a small device and pressed something, then, without a word, turned and walked down the street. Mason hurried back inside and locked the door. His heart was racing. He knew without a doubt that was the bounty hunter. When he turned around, Elira was already awake. She sat up quickly, clutching the blanket. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice shaking. Mason nodded. Scar, long coat, standing like a statue. She closed her eyes and whispered, "His name is Brask. He hunts people like me." "He saw me," Mason said. "I didn't say anything." "But he knows I saw him." Elira stood, pulling the oversized shirt tighter around her. "He won't knock. He won't ask questions," she said. "He'll come back when he's sure I'm here." Mason paced the room, thinking fast. "You said he needs permission to take you, right? He can't just grab you off the street." "In public? No," Elira replied. "But if no one claims me, if I'm seen as lost property, then yes." Mason stopped walking. "What if I claimed you?" Elira looked confused. "You can't buy me," she said quietly. "I'm not for sale anymore." "I don't mean like that," Mason said quickly. "What if I registered you? As a worker, a guest, something legal?" She frowned. "There's a way," she whispered. "But the process is old, rare. No one uses it anymore." "Then we'll use it," Mason said firmly. "Where?" "The Galactic Embassy," she replied. "They handle refugee and worker status, but it's on the other side of the city." Mason groaned. "That's an hour away." "Longer with traffic, and Brask is here now," she said, her voice low. "He'll follow us." Mason looked around the house. His safe world now felt like a cage. His quiet life was now tangled in alien laws and dangerous men. But when he looked at Elira, something inside him refused to back down. She had been through so much, and she still held on to those $3 like they were hope. He couldn't let her go back to being property. Not while he could still do something. "Pack what you can," he said. "We're going to the embassy." She nodded. Moving quickly, Mason grabbed a backpack and tossed in some food, clothes, and an old map tablet outside. He saw Brask again, this time talking to a local police officer. "That's bad," Mason muttered. If Brask got legal help, it would be over. They slipped out the back door, walking fast through alleys and side streets. Mason had lived here for years. He knew every shortcut, every quiet path, but still, he kept looking over his shoulder. Twice, he saw a dark shape moving far behind them. Brask was following, always staying just out of sight. "Don't stop," Mason whispered. "We're almost at the train station." Alira was quiet, breathing hard but staying close. She moved like someone used to running, but also used to pain, at the station. They boarded the old city train. It was half empty, filled with sleepy workers and noisy teens. Alira pulled the hood of her borrowed sweatshirt over her glowing hair. Mason sat beside her, watching every door. Brask didn't get on, but Mason knew this wasn't over. Halfway through the ride, Alira leaned toward him. "If we reach the embassy and I register, I'll be free." Mason looked at her. "Then that's what we'll do." He said, "No matter what it takes." The train rocked and hummed along the tracks. But Mason felt the pressure rising. This wasn't just about a shower anymore. It was about freedom, protection, and a choice. He didn't plan to become anyone's hero. But now that he'd opened the door, he couldn't walk away, because sometimes all it takes is $3 and a little kindness to change to lives forever. The train slowed down with a soft hiss. Mason and Alira stepped off quickly, blending into the morning crowd. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. Tall buildings stood around them like silent guards. The Galactic Embassy was still 6 blocks away, but every step felt like a gamble. One wrong turn, and Brask might find them. Alira walked with her head low. The hood pulled tight. Her glow was dimmer now, but still visible in shadow. Mason kept her close, his hand lightly touching her elbow, just enough to guide her but not control her. They passed a food stall, and a sharp scent hit the air. Grilled bread, melted cheese, warm oil. Alira stopped walking. Her stomach growled loud, and she held it quickly, embarrassed. "You okay?" Mason asked. She nodded, then looked at the stall again. "I haven't eaten in 2 days," she whispered. "Maybe more." Mason looked at the stall, then at her. "Come on," he said. "You need food, but I only have $3, she said quickly. Pulling out the crumpled bills, he smiled a little. "You're with me now." They walked to the stall, and Mason ordered 2 cheesy rolls and a bottle of water. The vendor looked at Alira with a strange face, curious, maybe even scared, but said nothing. When Mason handed her the warm roll, she didn't eat it right away. She just stared at it, holding it like it was a treasure. "You can eat it," he said, gently. She nodded slowly, then took a small bite. Her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Then tears rolled down her cheeks. "It's warm," she whispered, "and soft, and real." Mason was quiet, watching her. She chewed slowly, like every bite was something sacred. When she finished, she looked at the roll in her hand and said, "No one's ever made food just for me before." Mason didn't know what to say. His chest felt heavy, like someone had placed a stone on his heart. He had bought 100 of these rolls in his life, maybe more. But this one, this simple roll meant something bigger than food. It meant kindness. "You deserve better." He said, "Not chains, not fear, not hunger." She looked at him, and her lips trembled. "I don't remember the last time someone said that to me." They walked again, slower now, but something had changed in her. She stood a little straighter. Her eyes looked brighter, like that one meal had lit a fire inside her. Suddenly, Mason's communicator buzzed. He checked its known number. He ignored it, but then it buzzed again. And again, Alira stopped walking. "He's tracking you," she whispered, Brask. "He's calling your number." Mason froze. "Can he trace us?" "If he hacked your signal, yes." Mason quickly tossed the communicator into a trash bin nearby. Alira looked shocked. "You threw it away," she said. Surprised, "It was just a cheap model," he said. "You're not?" She didn't reply. But her face said everything. No one had ever chosen her over something valuable before. They reached the embassy gates 20 minutes later. Tall silver walls. Guards in white uniforms, glowing signs in 6 different languages. Mason stepped forward to speak with the front desk officer. Alira stood behind him, nervous but calm. She still held the empty food wrapper in one hand, like proof that kindness was real. The officer asked questions, many questions: name, status, origin, history, proof. Reason for arrival, Mason answered what he could. Alira answered the rest when she showed the scars on her back. The officer's eyes went cold. No registered worker should have injuries like these, he said. She was never registered, Mason replied. She was owned. The room fell silent. After a long pause, the officer nodded. You came just in time, he said. Another hour, and her name would have been marked for forced return. He handed Mason a data tablet. Fill this out. Claim her under emergency humanitarian sponsorship. Alira stepped closer. Does this mean I'm free? Not yet, the officer said. But soon she looked at Mason. He held the tablet. Ready to write? Are you sure you want to do this? She asked. This could follow you. Legally, socially. People may judge you. He looked at her and smiled. I let you in because you asked for a shower, he said. But now I see someone worth protecting. She blinked fast, trying not to cry again. Then I'll never forget you, she whispered. Even if I leave, I'll never forget. But as Mason started filling out the form, a sound echoed from outside, sharp, loud metal on stone. A guard ran inside. There's a bounty hunter outside the gate, he said. He says he has legal claim on a Telveri girl. Alira's face went pale. Mason stood tall and whispered, Not anymore. The doors of the Galactic Embassy closed behind them with a soft, metallic hum. But outside, trouble was already waiting. Through the glass walls, Mason could see him Brask, the bounty hunter with the scar, standing just beyond the security gate. His coat moved slightly in the wind. His boots were firm on the pavement. And his cold eyes never blinked. Alira stood frozen beside Mason. That's him, she whispered. He found us. Mason placed a hand on her shoulder. We're safe in here, he said. He can't come inside without clearance. The embassy guard confirmed it. He's filed a claim for retrieval, the officer said, but it's weak. He doesn't have the legal right without proper ownership documents. And her identity scan shows signs of abuse. Mason looked at the data pad in his hand. He had filled out most of the emergency sponsorship form, but it still needed biometric confirmation. They had to finish the process at the embassy's main terminal, located in the central registry hall. On the 10th floor, we need to move fast, the guard said. If Brask hacks the local records or pressures city police, he might get emergency access approved. What happens if he does? Mason asked. The guard hesitated. Then we won't be able to stop him. Alira's hands trembled again. She looked at Mason, her voice barely above a whisper. If he takes me, I won't survive. Mason nodded firmly. Then we won't let him. They followed a different guard through a back hallway. It smelled like old metal and cleaning chemicals. At the end of the hallway was a secure elevator. Guarded by a security bot with glowing red eyes, Alira looked nervous. I don't like small spaces, she said softly. Mason gave her a kind look. Just a few minutes, he said. Then freedom. They stepped inside. The door shut with a hiss as the elevator rose. Mason felt the tension grow. Meanwhile, on the street outside, Brask paced slowly. He placed a small cube on the ground, and it buzzed with quiet energy. It was a signal jammer. Within seconds, the building's outer sensors began to flicker. Inside the elevator, the lights blinked once, then twice. Something's wrong, Alira said. The elevator stopped suddenly between the 7th and 8th floor. A robotic voice spoke. System interruption detected. Emergency lock engaged. Mason hit the control panel. Nothing worked. We're trapped, he muttered. Alira backed into the corner. Her breathing quickened. I can't go back in the dark. Not again. she whispered. They used to lock me in small boxes when I disobeyed. Mason knelt in front of her. Hey, look at me, he said. You're not in a box now. You're not their property anymore. She nodded slowly, trying to steady her breath. Suddenly, a voice came from the panel. It was the embassy technician. We're rebooting the system, but someone's blocking our external link. It's deliberate. Mason knew who it was. Brask is cutting us off, he said. We don't have time. A moment later, the technician's voice returned. There's a maintenance ladder above the elevator. It'll take you to the next floor. Mason opened the ceiling hatch and looked up. It was dark, narrow, and full of cables. But it was their only chance. He climbed up first, then reached down to help Alira. Her hands were still shaking, but she gripped his tightly, step by step. They climbed through the dark. Her breath echoed in the metal tunnel, but she didn't stop when they reached the next floor. Mason pushed open the emergency grate and pulled her through. The registry hall was just around the corner now. They rushed down the hallway, past shocked staff and blinking security drones at the main terminal. An officer greeted them. You're Mason? And this is Alira. Yes, Mason said. We're ready. The officer placed Alira's hand on the biometric reader. The screen glowed, scanning her DNA. A moment passed, then a beep. Registration approved, the officer said. She's now under official human sponsorship, Alira gasped. So I'm free? You are, the officer replied. He can't touch you now, but just then. The doors burst open. Brask stormed in, 2 enforcers behind him. I demand she'll be released, he growled. She belongs to House Velkar. The officer stepped forward calmly. Not anymore, he said. She belongs to no one. She's recognized as a protected individual under Earth law. Brask's scar twitched. His eyes moved to Mason. You made a big mistake, human, he hissed. They'll come for you next. Mason didn't flinch. Let them, he said. I'd rather make enemies than let her go back to chains. Alira stood beside him, her hands still shaking, but her eyes firm. She didn't hide this time. She didn't bow. She stood tall, like someone who had just stepped into the light for the first time. Brask glared at them for a long moment, then turned and stormed out, his footsteps heavy with rage. The officer smiled. Don't worry, he said. We'll report him to Galactic Council. He won't be allowed on Earth again. Mason let out a breath. Alira sank to the floor, crying not from fear, but from relief. The escape plan had worked. But the real journey was just beginning, because now she was truly free. The embassy officer offered them a safe room to rest. But Mason refused politely. I think we should leave now, he said. Alira looked at him, confused. We're safe, aren't we? Mason nodded. For now, he said. But Brask won't give up that easily. He said something, Alira whispered. He said they'll come for you next. Mason's jaw tightened. He didn't care about threats, but he knew how powerful certain alien houses could be. If they marked him as a protector of stolen property, even Earth laws might not help forever. We'll lie low for a while, he said. I know a place. The embassy gave them an official data slip confirming Alira's protected status. They stored it on a chip and slipped it into a wristband for her. Don't lose this, the officer said. Without it, you're vulnerable outside. The rain had returned cold and heavy. Mason and Alira stepped into the storm, moving quickly toward the metro station. But halfway there, Mason noticed something. A black hoverbike parked across the street. Engine still humming, lights dim but on, and then Brask, standing in the alley, half hidden in shadow. He was alone this time. No guards, no enforcers. Just his cold eyes and scar-lined face. He's watching, Mason said quietly. Keep walking. Don't look back. Alira gripped his hand tightly. Her other hand clutched the wristband under her sleeve. Raindrops slid down her face. mixing with silent fear. Mason could feel her trembling again, but she didn't slow down. The sidewalk was slick, crowded with umbrellas and tired workers. They moved fast through it, turning left, then right. Brask followed from behind, always slow, always patient, like a wolf stalking its prey. Then the hoverbike engine revved loudly. Mason looked back. Brask was on it now. Moving toward them. "Run," Mason said. Grabbing Elira's hand, they sprinted through the wet streets. Splashing through puddles, the hoverbike roared behind them, swerving through pedestrians. People screamed and jumped aside. Brask was coming fast. Elira slipped once on the slick concrete. Mason caught her just in time. "I can't run forever," she gasped. "We don't need forever," he said. Just a few minutes, he led her down into the underground train entrance. The station was half flooded from the rain, but trains were still running. They ducked into a maintenance door Mason had used years ago during an outage. Inside it was dark, full of dripping pipes and the smell of rust. "This way," he said, leading her down a narrow tunnel. They could still hear the echo of boots. Brask was following. Not giving up, not slowing down. At the end of the tunnel was an old service lift. Mason jammed the override button and prayed it still worked. The platform shook, then started rising slowly. Brask's footsteps got louder. Elira looked at Mason. "If he catches me, he'll rip this band off," she whispered, "and no one will question it." Mason stood in front of her. "No one's taking you," he said. "Not while I'm still breathing." The lift reached the top of maintenance floor that led into a quiet street behind the train depot. The rain was heavier now, pouring like a curtain. Mason pulled her into the downpour, running through the shadows. Suddenly, Brask appeared at the far end of the alley. His coat soaked, his eyes locked on them. "Stop," he shouted. "You're not protected out here. She's still property beyond embassy walls." Mason turned and faced him. "She's got a band, registered and legal." He shouted back. Brask smirked. "I can rip it off and say it was fake." He stepped forward, but Elira moved past Mason. She stood alone in the rain, trembling but firm. "I'd rather die free than live as a slave," she shouted. "I'm not yours. Not anymore." Brask didn't stop. He raised a shock baton from his coat. One more steps suddenly flash. Blue lights flooded the alley. A hovercar from the Galactic Embassy dropped from above. "Engines worry. Stand down, Brask." A voice shouted through the speaker. "She is protected by Earth law. Your license to operate here is revoked." Brask froze. He looked at the lights, then at Mason, then at Elira. His hand shook slightly, then, with a low growl, he turned and vanished into the shadows. The hovercar landed, and an embassy agent stepped out. "We traced his interference," the agent said. "Came to back you up before anything happened." Mason helped Elira into the car. She collapsed in the seat, soaking wet, breathing fast. But this time she was smiling, not because she had escaped, but because for the first time in her life someone had stood in front of her. Someone had protected her. Mason looked over and said, "Looks like you're stuck with me now." She laughed softly. "Best deal I ever made. And all it cost me was $3. The rain had stopped by the time they reached Mason's house again. The clouds still hung low, but the air was calm. Elira stepped out of the embassy hovercar and looked around. It had only been 2 days since she stood here, barefoot and desperate, clutching $3 and begging for a shower. Now she stood taller, cleaner, and no longer afraid. Mason unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Home sweet home," he said, with a soft smile. Elira stepped inside. The familiar scent of warm wood and coffee welcoming her. It wasn't a palace, it wasn't fancy, but to her, it was the safest place in the entire galaxy. She looked at the couch, the one she had curled up on her first night. She looked at the towel still hanging on the rack near the bathroom door. Every object, every corner, now held a memory of freedom, of kindness, of survival. "Would you like something to eat?" Mason asked. Walking to the kitchen, Elira nodded. "Yes, please. But only if I can help." He looked back at her. Surprised, "You don't have to," he said. "I want to," she replied. "No one's ever let me do anything by choice before." Together, they cooked something simple: eggs, bread, and warm broth. Elira smiled as she stirred the pot. Mason handed her a spoon to taste it, and she nodded with joy. "It's perfect," she said. "Tastes like home." They sat together and ate in silence. Not the kind of silence that felt awkward, but the kind that wrapped around them like a blanket. Peaceful, real, human. After dinner, Elira stood by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked softly. Mason stood beside her. "They might," he said honestly, "but now you're registered, protected, and not alone." She turned to him. "Why did you do all this?" she asked. "You didn't know me?" "I could have been anyone," Mason thought for a moment, then said, "Because I saw someone hurting. Someone trying to stay strong even when the world gave her nothing. You reminded me of who we all should be: brave, kind, and full of hope. Even when life isn't fair." Elira blinked quickly, tears forming again. But this time, they weren't from sadness. They were from something else, something warmer, deeper. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the 3 crumpled dollar bills. "I want you to have these back," she said. "They're yours." Mason shook his head. "No," he said. "They were never about the money. They were a message. A message." He nodded. "They said, I may be dirty, I may be lost, but I still have something to offer. And that was more valuable than anything I've ever been given." Elira stared at the bills, then smiled. She walked over to a small shelf and placed them in a simple picture frame Mason had lying around. She set the frame next to the window, where sunlight would touch it each morning. "Now it's art," she said with a grin. The next few days were quiet, peaceful, and full of small joys. Mason helped her register for a basic ID card. She learned how to use his old datapad and even found part-time work at a local cafe. The owner was hesitant at first, but when Elira smiled and handed him her sponsorship badge, he welcomed her kindly on her first day of work. Mason walked her to the shop. She wore clean clothes, now still a bit big on her, but she had tied them at the waist and rolled the sleeves. Her hair was brushed, her glow was brighter, and her steps were light. "You sure you're ready?" Mason asked. She nodded. "I've waited my whole life for this." Later that evening, she returned, tired but happy. She sat on the couch and kicked off her shoes. "People smiled at me," she said, "not because they owned me, just because I was there." Mason smiled too. "That's how it should always be." She looked at him, her expression softer now. "You didn't just give me a place to shower," she said. "You gave me a name, a voice, a second chance. You did all that yourself," he replied. "I just opened the door." Elira stood, walked over, and sat beside him. "I don't know where my life goes from here," she said, "but I want to stay." "For now, you're welcome here," Mason said quietly. "For as long as you want." Outside, the night was calm again. No bounty hunters, no danger, no fear, just a small house, a warm couch, and the sound of laughter from a girl who once had nothing. Elira leaned her head on Mason's shoulder. $3, she whispered. "That's all I had, and it was more than enough," he replied. "Because sometimes a warm home doesn't need riches. Sometimes it just needs a door left open, and someone kind enough to say, 'Come in.'"